What happens when a global superstar collides headfirst with a late-night host's relentless probing? You won't believe what unfolds when Jennifer Lopez sits down for what was supposed to be a routine promotional interview, only to find herself in the crosshairs of Jimmy Kimmel's most controversial line of questioning yet. The tension that builds in this studio will leave you speechless, and the explosive confrontation that erupts will change everything you thought you knew about celebrity interviews. Before we get into this incredible story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below, because you're not going to believe what unfolds when these two entertainment titans clash in the most dramatic way possible. The stage was set for what appeared to be another typical Tuesday night on Jimmy Kimmel Live. The audience buzzed with anticipation as Jennifer Lopez, radiant in a form-fitting emerald dress, made her entrance to thunderous applause. She waved graciously, her signature smile lighting up the studio as she settled into the guest chair across from Kimmel. The host, wearing his characteristic smirk, seemed unusually animated as he shuffled through his note cards. Jennifer Lopez. "Everybody," Kimmel announced, his voice carrying that familiar edge that regular viewers had come to recognize as a warning sign. "Thank you so much for being here. You look absolutely stunning as always." Lopez smiled warmly, crossing her legs and adjusting her posture with the practiced grace of someone who'd done countless interviews. "Thank you, Jimmy. It's great to be back." But something felt different from the moment the cameras started rolling. Kimmel's usual banter carried an undercurrent of something sharper, more pointed. His eyes held a glint that suggested he had an agenda beyond the standard promotional interview format. "So Jennifer, let's talk about your new project," Kimmel began, his tone deceptively casual. "But first I have to ask, and I think our audience is dying to know, how do you manage to stay so relevant decade after decade? I mean, some people might say it's impressive, others might wonder if there's a secret formula." The question hung in the air like a loaded weapon. Lopez's smile faltered for just a fraction of a second, before she recovered, her media training kicking in. "Well, Jimmy, I think it's about connecting with people authentically and always challenging myself creatively." "Authentically," Kimmel repeated, drawing out the word as if he were tasting something bitter. "That's interesting, because I've been reading some things lately, and I'm curious about your thoughts on authenticity versus, let's say, reinvention. Some critics have suggested that your recent projects feel a bit calculated." The studio audience shifted uncomfortably in their seats. This wasn't the playful ribbing they were accustomed to seeing on late-night television. Lopez's posture stiffened almost imperceptibly, but her smile remained fixed in place. "I'm not sure what you mean by that, Jimmy," she replied, her voice maintaining its professional warmth despite the slight tension creeping in around her eyes. Kimmel leaned forward, his expression mock-concerned. "Oh, come on, Jennifer. We're all friends here. I'm talking about the way you've managed to stay in the headlines. The relationships, the career moves, the public appearances. It's almost like watching a masterclass in brand management." The words hit their target. Lopez's smile finally cracked, replaced by something cooler, more guarded. "I think you might be confusing living your life in the public eye with brand management, Jimmy. When you're in this business as long as I have been, people tend to scrutinize everything you do." "Scrutinize, sure," Kimmel nodded, but his tone suggested he wasn't backing down. "But some might say you've given them plenty to scrutinize. The whirlwind romance with Ben Affleck, the very public rekindling of that relationship. And now, well, let's just say the tabloids have been having a field day." The mention of her personal life sent a visible chill through Lopez. Her jaw tightened, and she uncrossed and recrossed her legs, a subtle sign of growing discomfort that Kimmel seemed to relish. "I've always been open about my life," Lopez said, her voice taking on a sharper edge. "I don't apologize for falling in love or for pursuing happiness, and I certainly don't need to justify my personal choices to anyone." "Of course not," Kimmel agreed with exaggerated sympathy. "But you have to admit, the timing of certain announcements, certain public appearances, They do seem to coincide remarkably well with your project releases, almost like someone's pulling the strings behind the scenes." The accusation hung between them like a challenge. Lopez's hands, which had been resting gracefully in her lap, now gripped the arms of her chair. The studio lights seemed to burn hotter as the tension escalated. "Are you suggesting that I orchestrate my personal life for publicity?" Lopez asked, her voice dropping to a dangerously quiet level. Kimmel shrugged, his casual demeanor a stark contrast to the charged atmosphere he'd created. "I'm not suggesting anything. I'm just observing patterns. It's what comedians do. We notice things that other people might miss." "And what exactly have you noticed, Jimmy?" Lopez's question came out like a challenge, her professional facade finally beginning to crack under the pressure of his relentless probing. The audience could feel the shift in energy. What had started as an interview was rapidly transforming into something else entirely, a confrontation that neither participant seemed willing to back down from. Kimmel's production crew exchanged nervous glances, unsure whether to intervene or let the drama play out. "Well," Kimmel said, settling back in his chair, with the satisfaction of someone who knew he'd struck a nerve, "I've noticed that every time there's a lull in your career, something dramatic happens in your personal life that gets everyone talking again. It's almost like clockwork." The words landed like a slap across Lopez's face. Her composure, built over decades of handling difficult interviews and hostile media, finally began to show cracks. Her eyes flashed with something that looked dangerously close to anger. "That's a very interesting theory, Jimmy," she said, her voice now carrying an unmistakable edge of warning. "But perhaps you should stick to comedy instead of amateur psychology." But Kimmel wasn't finished. If anything, her resistance seemed to fuel his determination to push further into uncomfortable territory. The interview was about to take a turn that no one in that studio, not the crew, not the audience, and certainly not Jennifer Lopez herself, was prepared for. Kimmel leaned back in his chair, a predatory smile spreading across his face as he prepared to deliver what he clearly considered his knockout punch. "You know what I find fascinating, Jennifer? The whole Ben Affleck situation. I mean, we all watched that relationship implode spectacularly 20 years ago, and then suddenly, right when your last album wasn't performing as expected, boom, you're back together, making out on yachts, getting married in Vegas. It's like someone hit the replay button on your greatest publicity hits." The color drained from Lopez's face. The mention of her marriage, her most personal and vulnerable relationship, crossed a line that even the most aggressive interviewers rarely dared to approach. Her hands trembled slightly as she fought to maintain control. "That's enough," Lopez said, her voice barely above a whisper but carrying the weight of a thunderclap. "My marriage is not a publicity stunt, Jimmy. It's my life." "Oh, I'm sure it feels real to you," Kimmel continued, his tone dripping with mock sincerity. "But come on, Jennifer. The timing, the very public displays of affection, the coordinated social media posts. Even your fans started calling it Bennifer 2.0, like it was a sequel nobody asked for." The audience had gone completely silent. What had started as uncomfortable murmuring had evolved into dead silence, as viewers realized they were witnessing something unprecedented, a complete breakdown of the traditional interview format. Several audience members looked around nervously, unsure whether they should laugh, gasp, or simply look away. Lopez's professional mask finally shattered completely. She sat forward in her chair, her eyes blazing with an intensity that made Kimmel's smug expression falter for just a moment. "You have absolutely no idea what you're talking about. Ben and I reconnected as real people, not as some calculated business move. The fact that you can't understand genuine human emotion says more about you than it does about me." "Genuine human emotion," Kimmel repeated mockingly. "Is that what we're calling it? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like a 40-something woman desperately trying to recapture her youth by recycling old relationships. It's actually kind of sad when you think about it." The insult hit like a physical blow. Lopez's face flushed with anger. and for a moment it looked like she might actually stand up and leave. But something kept her rooted to the spot. Perhaps professional obligation, perhaps sheer disbelief at what was happening. "You want to talk about sad, Jimmy?" Lopez shot back, her voice rising for the first time. "What's sad is a late-night host who's so desperate for ratings that he thinks attacking his guests' personal lives passes for entertainment. What's sad is a man who hides behind comedy to justify being cruel." Kimmel's eyes narrowed. The accusation had clearly struck a nerve, but instead of backing down, he doubled down on his attack. "Cruel? I'm just asking the questions that everyone's thinking. The questions that other interviewers are too polite or too scared to ask. Someone has to point out that the emperor has no clothes." "The emperor has no clothes?" Lopez repeated incredulously. "Are you seriously comparing me to a fairy tale character? This is your idea of journalism?" "It's not journalism, Jennifer. It's comedy. And sometimes comedy means pointing out uncomfortable truths. Like the fact that your last 3 major relationships have all coincidentally aligned with career transitions. Like the fact that every time you need to sell something, an album, a movie, a perfume, suddenly there's drama in your personal life that gets you back on magazine covers." The accusation was so direct, so personal, that it left Lopez momentarily speechless. She stared at Kimmel with a mixture of shock and growing rage, as if she couldn't quite believe that someone would say such things to her face on national television. "You think I manufacture drama in my personal life for publicity?" she asked, her voice dangerously quiet. "I think you're very, very good at making sure your personal life serves your professional interests," Kimmel replied smoothly. "And I think you've been doing it for so long that maybe you don't even realize you're doing it anymore." Lopez stood up abruptly, her chair nearly toppling backward from the force of her movement. The sudden action sent a ripple of shock through the studio audience, and several cameras quickly adjusted to capture her reaction. "I don't have to sit here and listen to this," she said, her voice shaking with barely controlled fury. "I came here to talk about my work, not to be psychoanalyzed by someone who wouldn't know genuine emotion if it hit him in the face." But Kimmel wasn't ready to let her go. "Sit down, Jennifer. We're not finished here." "Oh, we're finished," Lopez replied, taking a step toward the edge of the stage. "We're more than finished." "Are we?" Kimmel asked, his voice taking on a challenging tone. "Because I haven't even gotten to the best part yet. I haven't talked about the financial arrangements, the publicity teams, the carefully orchestrated paparazzi shots. Should I keep going?" The threat hung in the air like a loaded gun. Lopez froze mid-step, turning back to face Kimmel with a look that could have melted steel. The implication that he had more damaging information, more personal attacks to unleash, created a moment of pure tension that seemed to stretch on forever. "You know what, Jimmy?" Lopez said, her voice now carrying a deadly calm that was somehow more terrifying than her earlier anger. "Go ahead. Say whatever you think you know. Because I've been in this business for 30 years, and I've dealt with bullies like you my entire career." Kimmel's smug expression flickered with uncertainty. He hadn't expected her to call his bluff so directly. "I'm not a bully, Jennifer. I'm just—" "You're just what?" Lopez interrupted, taking a step back toward his desk with the confidence of someone who had finally found her footing in the fight. "You're just a man who gets his kicks from tearing down successful women? You're just a coward who hides behind a late-night comedy show to justify being cruel?" The audience was completely transfixed. Several people had pulled out their phones, despite network policies, sensing that they were witnessing television history in the making. The tension in the studio was so thick it was almost suffocating. "I think you're deflecting," Kimmel said, but his voice had lost some of its earlier confidence. "You don't want to address the real questions about your pattern of behavior." "My pattern of behavior?" Lopez laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Let's talk about patterns, Jimmy. Let's talk about your pattern of attacking women guests while giving men softball questions. Let's talk about your pattern of thinking that a woman's personal life is fair game for your comedy routine." Kimmel's face flushed red. "That's not—" That's not what? Lopez pressed, her voice growing stronger with each word. That's not true? Really? When was the last time you questioned a male guest about whether his relationships were publicity stunts? When was the last time you suggested that a man was too old to fall in love? The pointed questions hit their mark. Kimmel shifted uncomfortably in his chair, clearly unprepared for Lopez to turn the tables so effectively. His production team looked on helplessly, unsure whether to cut to commercial or let the confrontation play out. You want to know what's really sad, Jimmy? Lopez continued, her voice rising again. What's sad is that you had one of the most successful entertainers in the world sitting in that chair. Someone who's built an empire across music, film, fashion, and business. And, instead of celebrating that achievement, you chose to tear it down. You chose to reduce a woman's entire career to her dating life. I never said, Kimmel started, but Lopez wasn't finished. You never said what? You never said I was desperate? You never implied that my marriage was fake? You never suggested that I manipulate my personal life for publicity? Lopez's voice was now filled with righteous anger. Because I'm pretty sure this entire audience heard you say exactly that. Several audience members actually nodded in agreement, their sympathies clearly shifting away from their host and toward his guest. The energy in the room had completely transformed. Kimmel tried to regain control of the situation. Look, Jennifer, if you can't handle a little criticism— Criticism? Lopez exploded. You call attacking someone's marriage, their personal relationships, their age, and their integrity criticism? That's not criticism, Jimmy. That's character assassination, masquerading as entertainment. The accusation landed like a bomb. Kimmel's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water as he struggled to find a response that wouldn't make him look even worse than he already did. And you know what the most pathetic part is? Lopez pressed on, her voice now carrying the authority of someone who had completely seized control of the conversation. You thought you could intimidate me. You thought that because you're the host, because this is your show, because you have a microphone and an audience, that you could just tear me down and I would sit there and take it. She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in before delivering her final blow. But here's what you forgot, Jimmy. I didn't get where I am by letting small men make me feel small. I didn't build my career by backing down from bullies. And I certainly didn't survive 30 years in this industry by letting talk show hosts who peaked in the 90s tell me who I am. The audience erupted in unexpected applause. The sound seemed to shock Kimmel, who looked around the studio as if he couldn't believe his own audience was turning against him. Lopez smiled for the first time since the interview began, but it wasn't her earlier professional smile. This was the smile of someone who had just won a battle they hadn't expected to fight. You wanted to know about authenticity, Jimmy? She said, her voice now calm and controlled. This is authenticity. This is what it looks like when someone refuses to be diminished by your small-minded questions and your desperate attempts to create controversy. She turned to face the audience directly, ignoring Kimmel completely. Thank you all for being here tonight. I hope you'll check out my new project, not because I manufactured some drama to promote it, but because it represents years of hard work and genuine artistic passion. The applause grew louder. Lopez nodded graciously to the audience, then turned back to Kimmel one final time. As for you, Jimmy, I think this interview is over. And frankly, so is any chance of me ever coming back to this show. With that declaration, Lopez walked off the stage with her head held high, leaving Kimmel sitting alone at his desk, speechless and visibly shaken. The audience continued to clap, many of them rising to their feet in a standing ovation that followed Lopez all the way to the exit. Kimmel sat in stunned silence for several seconds, the cameras still rolling, capturing every moment of his humiliation. When he finally tried to speak, his voice came out as barely more than a whisper. "We'll be right back," he managed to say, but the damage was already done. As the show cut to commercial, The audience continued to buzz with excitement and shock at what they had just witnessed. Many were already pulling out their phones, knowing they had just seen something that would be talked about for years to come. Jennifer Lopez had walked into Jimmy Kimmel's studio as a guest, but she was leaving as something else entirely. A woman who had refused to be torn down and had turned the tables on her attacker in the most spectacular way possible. The interview was over, but the impact of what had just happened would reverberate far beyond that studio, marking a moment when a celebrity finally said, "Enough was enough" to the culture of hostile interrogation that had become far too common in late-night television.